This is a design panel, right? We're going to be talking about designing robots for human-centered experiences. We have Mara joining us again from Chowbotics, and Matt Rolandson, the head of experience design at Ammunition Group. Now, you guys have both actually worked on Sally, right? You guys are both, you have worked together. This isn't your first time, well, the companies anyway, right?
Yeah, we've had some collaborations, yes.
Okay, that's great. So what I want to talk about here is, let's start with, hold on a second. Let's start with the software, right? We've been talking a lot about hardware today, but one of the things that is crucial is just sort of the decision tree design. Yeah. And how do you, we just learned in the last panel that some people will just stare at a screen and not do anything. What kind of work do you put in to minimize it? And that can go from like the colors you choose to the font you pick. Like what kinds of thinkings went into that, and how many iterations did you go through before you finally found something that really connected with people?
Well, I will say in my case, I feel we're constantly iterating and we're constantly learning. So it's actually like, we're really always listening. We're always looking at the data. We're looking where people are dropping off, where we see issues, so we can improve the experience for sure. So I don't think we have one thing ready yet. So it's always a work in progress, and we're constantly learning. As we were saying before, we're actually launching in different markets. So it's actually the behavior is different as well. And the decisions are, made in different ways. I think in general, people tend to buy with their eyes. So I will say one of the things that is actually quite critical for us is food photography, making sure that things are getting, more appetizing and making it better and more clear. So yeah, there's a lot of learnings in there.
Yeah, and I'm just going to back up a little bit to answer that question. I mean, we are a design studio that works with founders at startups and early stage companies, largely in the role of just like helping them bring all of these disparate things they're trying to figure out together into something that's going to create a bunch of successful moments like the one in your question. Yeah. And I think, one of the bigger things we try to do is help founders understand that this whole concept of seamlessness and user experience is super unuseful and unrealistic, and rather to kind of organize their thinking and their product decisions around the seams themselves and just focusing on really good, purposeful seams. Ultimately, the whole service experience is about orchestrating transitions. And so kind of starting there in as a service, as a concept, which is really just a set of transitions you're trying to encourage people to go through. And then, just as Mara was saying, inside that, there's really just a great deal of experimentation around, in different contexts, at different times of day, for different users, what's going to successfully guide them across that transition from like, I don't know if I like this thing, to, oh, okay, I'll give it a try, for example. Mm-hmm.
So, Ammunition, thank you, because I was remiss in pointing this out earlier. You've worked with a lot of companies over a lot of projects. Beats by Dre, right?
Yeah.
Like the Polaroid Zinc, the Lyft signage, and the Ember coffee mug, appropriate for this audience. What were you able to bring sort of from previous experiences and previous knowledge? Obviously not trade secrets or anything like that, but like, we know from this that ceramic works for this, or... what were you able to sort of bring in from an outside? So Chowbotics is focused on building Sally. We want to make this robot, right? They have a prototype and they want to bring it to market.
Right.
How are you able to come in and bring in your outside expertise to help with that?
Well, I think the kind of first line of that for us is we do a lot of investing and business partnerships in most of the companies you listed there and a lot of other ones. So I think a designer's perspective on just how to organize resources and prioritize, what you do with your use of funds or with your team is a big part of what we do. And to be totally candid, a lot of times what we do in the early stages suggests that the founders not make an outsized investment in design.
Okay.
And I think that comes from our prior experiences with other things as investors and designers in general. And what I mean is one of the, I think, bigger mistakes that founders make, especially in hardware in general, but maybe in this space as well, is they try to like kind of do everything under this cloak of secrecy, and then there's going to be a big reveal and it's all going to be amazing, rather than kind of developing a discipline around iteration, as Mara was saying. So in the case of Chowbotics and Cafe X as well, and a number of others, I think something that made us really happy was the idea that they themselves, with whatever resources they had on hand, made a version of a thing that tried to do the thing they thought was smart. It, was design a part of that? Yeah, sort of in an engineering-led way. But just that kind of initial burst of validation, that initial investment to see if we're really onto something here is something that we've advised companies to do quite a bit.
I will elaborate on that. I think, from the company perspective, I agree 100%. He can see it from the big picture. We see it from the more granular picture, right? So but despite that, we always have to look at the hardcore problem, right? So, for example, as we were talking in the panel before, for example, in terms of the user experience, so we see that people are actually, we have more drop-offs in this screen. So we know that that's a problem that we have to solve first because being a startup, you have to really determine really what are your higher priority, obviously, right? So you have certain amount of, resources, et cetera. So you have to be really smart in the way that you're actually really executing. But in a way, you really have to make sure that you're actually really conveying and listening to the consumer, and making the changes that they're actually really, there's a need for, instead of really trying, something.
So this will go to both of you. When do you know that you should bring in, so Chowbotics starts with a prototype, right? And when do you know when to bring in an outside firm to help with your design? And it's sort of the counterpoint to what he was saying.
So, yes, you definitely have to have a product for sure. You need to have a product in place to make sure that there's a need for it and people are actually really interested in it. So you validate your business model in a way. And then I feel it's actually the right moment to start, socializing with agencies and kind of just really understanding how can we actually make this better. So you have the investment, you have the capital, you have the strength to actually really move forward. So the ideas don't come, they can crystallize, right? So otherwise you just have an idea in a closet and doesn't happen. So you really need to make sure that you have the resources as well to allocate those ideas into place as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to get into really minute details here, right? So what are the little things people don't think about? Photography is a really excellent example, right? I can't imagine anything that would ruin a chicken salad faster than some, jaundiced picture of some wilted lettuce or whatever, right? So you have to have really good pictures. But even, we were talking before about things like lighting and how it comes out lit, or how the ingredients are lit inside. What are those things that you kind of picked up along the way? And I'll open it up to both of you as just those little nitty-gritty things that people might not understand. Matt, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think the biggest thing, and this is going to sound a little simplistic, but is the relationship we have with food, the relationship proprietors have with preparing food is profoundly emotional. And I think especially in this kind of automation and robotic space, we are focusing quite a bit on just getting the job done because it's miraculous to be able to get the job done, but we're dealing with consumers. They quickly come to take things for granted. So we're in this more emotional consumer space again. So giving people things like photography that draws them into the sort of alluring idea of what's delicious and satisfying, or giving proprietors tools that they can use in order to, make kind of seasonal offers and kind of change things up so it doesn't seem like it's habitual. I think those sorts of things are really important and easy to overlook while we're rushing to get our public beta to market.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. In our case, photography is a huge thing, but it's interesting because you don't want to overpromise either, right? So you have to have that, fine balance to make sure that it's something that it looks appetizing and delicious, but yet it's actually something executable. So we're very, detail-oriented in that sense. We want to make sure that whatever, and we're iterating on the experience constantly, kind of just to really make sure that we really bring something that is, that it's something that you can get. But we also have, and you're right, light matters, it matters, the whole experience in general, the way that it looks, the colors that we pick, everything matters. But another thing that is also interesting is the people behind, in our case, behind the, Sally. So for example, the operators also matter, right? Because those are the people who are actually behind the machine, making sure that it actually is delicious and it looks beautiful and is clean and is kept perfect. And we have to talk to them too. So we have to make sure that the experience is easy so they cannot be dismissed. So everybody, involved with the experience from the consumer facing, but also behind the scenes matters in our case.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So if you have a Chowbotics in your store, in your office building, right? The ingredients may swap out, but how do you keep people from going blind to the machine? Right, so they're passing it every day. I guess, granted, a hospital setting is a little different because you have staff and patients who are coming in. Yeah. But for places where people pass it every day, how do you make sure it's not stayed? How do you make sure people don't just gloss over it and go like, oh, I don't want that because, I know what it's in there, right? Yeah. But you're changing the menu. What kinds of things can you do to freshen it up?
So we do work really closely with the operators, like the people inside, and we're actually constantly changing menus. That's something that we realize that in office settings, actually the people really get bored very easily. So it's normal, right? You get the same food constantly, so you want something fresh and something new. So Sally becomes more of almost like one of their stations in a way. So when you go to these cafeterias, they normally have this sushi station, the Latin station, whatever. So Sally becomes one of them, which is 24 hours, which is something, that they couldn't offer before. But yet they try to constantly be changing the menu. We do new, pretty regular marketing materials such as posters, Slack messages, emails, like the whole thing, the regular stuff. We also kind of just display on their, on the screen, kind of just what's actually offering inside as well. So yeah, we have to do marketing. We have to do, different touch points, but also obviously, again, like going back to the operator, they have to constantly be changing in order to keep it up and kind of just, provide something fresh, and they know that there's something fresh constantly.
Yeah. So, Matt, as you're helping design this machine, right, there's, for something like a salad, to your point, there's sort of like the probably, if you think about like if you see a Whopper on TV versus what you get at the store, there's a big gulf between there. Sure. So, like, how much thought and effort do you put into the way ingredients are dispensed and the order of which, and there's the amount that you want, but that's kind of baked in. But like, do you put the lettuce down and then tomatoes, or do you want the red to pop? Like, how much are you thinking about where the chicken goes in the way it spins around? Yeah,
I mean, this is a big debate in marketing communication in general. Is it better to put a plastic see-through window on the packaging so that the consumer can see what's inside, even though it's probably like in a Walmart with crummy lighting? Or do you put a really gorgeous, retouched, rendered image on the front of it to give the kind of most idealized image? I think when it comes to food, we just sort of tend to err on the side of actually exposing the customer to the actual product. Yeah. I mean, we love the idea of exposing users to the process by which their food is being created. It seems like, especially at this particular moment when these machines are quite new, that it's good to be transparent about what's happening with the thing they're about to eat. Yeah. So I think for now we have found ourselves erring on that side of things. In the case of Chowbotics, it's really about putting those fresh ingredients on display, having good protocols with the food service managers to make sure that stuff's replenished and fresh and clean, and things like lighting, and then kind of secondary promotional graphics and things like that. So let's actually talk about that for a second, because there's actually two audiences that you need to design for, right? Industrial design. You've got the end user, but you also have the person who's stocking it and cleaning it. And so it has to be designed in a way that it's pretty easy for someone to come in. And as I think Deepak mentioned earlier, like, there would be new people coming in. And so you've got to be able to quickly get them up to speed.
Yes, so the food industry actually has quite a lot of rotation, so they normally have new people constantly, right? So especially the operators, the people who are filling the machines, there are people that are constantly changing, so we want to make sure that the experience that we create is as easy as possible, and we're working on it, kind of just to create a more seamless experience, so they don't need to even be trained. They can actually immediately watch like as they go, they get trained. So it's really easy, like opening a door, they know exactly what to do, and they can take the flow like that. So that's something that we're working on it, kind of just to really make the flow easier. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when we're planning out the overall product experience, sometimes the priority audience is the kind of employee or staff audience, because ultimately they're going to be delivering the service to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely, it's at least an equal priority to the end consumer.
Yeah. Is there anything in the world of like materials science that's new? So like, because it's food grade, you're touching food, you can only work with certain materials, right?
Right.
Is there anything new or interesting or anything used in a different way, or are we just kind of settled out to where we're, it's stainless steel or,
I mean, to be totally honest about that, we're, or candid, frank, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of newness and a lot of complexity here. And the last thing that I'm going to recommend is bringing materials that are kind of just possibly exiting the R&D stage into, an innovation project. Invention and innovation are very different things, and I think when they collide, it creates a lot of risk. So with respect to food safety or durability or cleanability, we are definitely kind of moving toward like, hey, let's use things that work here. There's already enough new risky stuff in the mix.
Okay, so there's really no, like, everything's sort of at scale right now. There's really no need, there's no incentive to sort of move too far afield in any particular, you know what works.
Massive disincentive. I mean, there's already plenty of risk in the mix.
Yeah, I will agree with that. I have to say, we're already kind of just trying to train consumers to try something completely new that they couldn't do before. So, adding that to the mix, something that is, like too drastically different can be, challenging. So I think creating some kind of familiarity helps definitely the consumer also to feel safer.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Do we have any questions from the audience? Want to make sure we leave some time for that. Yep, right there.
Hi. One of the things I learned when designing website and human-computer interaction, my professor used to use an acronym called CRAP, Contrast, Repetition, Alignment, Proximity. Is there a similar thing for robotics design from the human-computer interaction perspective? 3 or 4 points we should remember?
I have to apologize. I was having a hard time.
So he was saying that there's like the CRAP, an acronym, right? Are there some hard and fast rules for designing food robotic stuff?
I think the one thing in terms of like specific tactics around interaction design for food and robotics is just trying to compress the kind of call and response time as much as possible. I mean, trying to borrow interaction design patterns from other media, like signing up for your Netflix account for the first time, is not going to work when you're just hungry between meetings and you're just, trying to get something to eat. So I think for us, it's just being very, very disciplined about fast transactions when it comes to interaction design, because it's just totally different context than, an app or something happening in a browser.
Yeah, and same,
I would totally agree with you.
That's a good thing. You guys should work together at some point because you are in sync. Any other questions from the audience? No. Okay, that's fine. We got a couple more minutes here. So I want to talk a little bit about. So there's materials on the inside, but then there's materials on the outside, right? Like, and you discovered something that a big metal box wasn't necessarily the friendliest way for people. Can you talk about the role of wood in the design of your Sally?
Yes. So we came up with different designs, to actually wrap Sally. But one of the things, the findings that we got through the user experience, we do everything user testing, then we do A/B testing, we do everything that we can. So just to really validate the concept that we have, and we're constantly validating, right? So we iterate and we validate and we iterate and we validate. But one of the things that we actually encounter is that people really wanted to have some kind of more root, something warmer, something that they make them feel this is back to cooking in a way. So they wanted to have those, like grains, those, like definitely the wood was what it was speaking to the consumers. They're really traditional fonts, things that we never really thought about, right? So we actually were going with a more, fun design, and actually people were craving something entirely different because the machine itself already is actually presenting something so new that they wanted to go back to something that they felt it associates with food. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I would just add to that and say there's external ways of making those decisions, like, okay, what do people seem to prefer, like traditional archetypes like wood and like agriculturally stuff. But I think the place where we found really good results working with early stage companies is leaning pretty hard on the sort of almost the prejudices or the kind of selfish desires of founders. I think those things are really rich as well, and important facets of building the brand and making decisions around things that are otherwise quite subjective around design. So in the case of virtually all the products we've ever worked on, in many ways they are expressions of just the kind of selfish vision that the founding team has for the audience. I think just asking the audience questions about that, what they'd prefer, can end up giving you something very average in terms of just the emotional impact of a physical product, for example.
And then lastly, like in terms of accessibility, like how much can you design into that? So hard of hearing or visually impaired, what can you build into your machine to help with that, or design in a way that helps with people who may need extra help in particular areas?
In our case, we're actually hoping to develop very soon an app, so people can actually order, from the app, regardless of their, physical capabilities.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, the machine is actually, you can dispensable and everything in an easy way. But right now, the location of the screen is a little high for people who are actually in a wheelchair, for example. So we're trying to kind of come up with solutions to really fit that niche. Yeah.
Interesting.
I'd say we live in a fairly miraculous time when it comes to accessibility because of the accessibility features that are built into Android and the iOS, and the accessibility kind of guidelines and tools that are in the SDKs for those OSs. It's incredible. And then the kind of third-party accessories to kind of create physical bridges for people with disabilities, also incredible. I mean, it doesn't take away from sort of ADA type physical accessibility issues with the devices themselves, but to be candid, really like the amazing things that Android and iOS are doing like really makes me feel a lot better about a lot of the things that we're involved with. I'm grateful for that.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both so much for being on the panel. Big round of applause, please, as we head into our afternoon break.
Thanks.